Tech Cocktail Conversations, candid insights from startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from around the globe.
All right, thank you all for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. This is our fourth event here in Chicago this year. Super excited to be back and hosting a speaker-style sessions event here with Cars.com. We've been working with Cars.com now for 4 years, and they've just been a great partner as we continue to try to reconnect, and share different stories and knowledge with the local tech community here. I just got back from a trip. I've been on the road a lot since I last saw you, and actually for the last 6 months. I just got back from London and Dublin, so I got in last night, and I'm a little bit messed up time zone wise, so hopefully I don't fall asleep. Drank a lot of coffee today to stay awake, and but it's super exciting to be back here in the Windy City and with all of you. So I'm sure that I'll be very attentive and awake the entire time because we've got some great talks and speakers here tonight. For those of you who have been following along, a month ago today, we had our Celebrate conference. Anybody here go to Celebrate? Wow, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we had two. I was there. So for those of you that missed out on an amazing conference, don't worry, because we're doing it again. This last year we had 51 companies, including 2 Chicago companies, that competed at one of the events here. They ended up advancing to go to the Celebrate conference, which they then competed against 51 different companies from around the country. And we ended up then crowning the nation's hottest startup. And so you can actually find out more about that at tech.co, our website. There's also videos of all the different speakers that were at the event as well, that we've been putting those out on tech.co, as well as our YouTube channel. So yes, we're on YouTube, and if you go to Tech Cocktail, you'll be able to find all of those videos. You can subscribe and watch them to your heart's delight. So hopefully that's helpful for you, like, as we continue to try to share knowledge and bring together great thought leaders from around the country. So for those of you that want to attend next year, you can actually sign up, pre-register right now if you go to celebrate.tech.co. It's going to be happening October 5th and 6th out in Las Vegas. So that'll be something fun to look forward to. It's not the Vegas that you think of. It's actually downtown Vegas. So for anyone concerned about having to go to the Strip or anything like that, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's a little bit more refreshing, and you'll feel really good about being downtown. Of course, you can always take a taxi up there, too, if you want to. So for those of you, how many people read Tech Cocktail regularly? Now, be honest. All right, thank you. There's a couple. You can actually find out more about Chicago news if you go to tech.co/Chicago. How many people are subscribed to just Chicago? Anybody here? A few people. Okay. So yeah, you can get the newsletters for anything happening in Chicago regularly. We also have a Twitter feed as well, so you can kind of keep track of what's going on there. And then we're also, for tonight specifically, we've got a tweet wall. So anybody tweet yet? Anybody on Twitter? A couple people. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, so I hope that you're ready for this. Maybe it's still the food digesting, but there's going to be a lot of interaction here, so might need to fire up a little bit more. But yeah, the tweet wall's over here. If you tweet hashtag TechCocktailShy, almost like you are, you're a little shy right now. TechCocktailShy, CHI. You can actually ask questions via the tweet wall, as well as afterwards. You can also we're going to do some actual raising of the arms, where you actually get to ask a question in person if you are brave enough to do so. So we're going to get going with that in a second. A few more housekeeping things here. Startup Mixology is a book that I just wrote and been running around the country talking to people about. If you want to get a copy of it, we actually have copies here. I believe they're in the back. They are for sale. Unfortunately, they can't give free books all the time, or that wouldn't be good for our publisher, Wiley. They wouldn't probably be happy with me. But you can definitely pick one of those up. And also, again, we want to thank our sponsors, Cars.com. There's a few people. Let's hear it for Cars. Okay, I'm going to actually do an exercise. Can everyone just stand up and stretch for a moment? Just like get it going. Like, what can we do? Like, maybe we should jump a little bit. Who wants to jump? Anybody? Like, I just feel like we're a little bit light here today. Got to wake up a little bit. Shots. Oh, we should do that. That's an idea. All right. So, also want to thank Khorus. They're a sponsor of tonight's event. There's going to be a book signing as well tonight after Joel speaks. He's the CEO of Khorus, and that'll be in the back over here after both speeches. We've also got Hoffman Media right here filming us. So again, these videos will be online, so you'll be able to check those out and watch them over and over again. Social Media Club Chicago is a community partner. Thank you to Social Media Club Chicago for helping spread the word. Saper Law is a community partner. American Airlines is a big partner of ours around the country. So if you're a business traveler and would like to connect with them and travel out for business, they want to talk to you. So connect with myself or Julia or anybody from Tech Cocktail, and we'll help better connect you there. Also, .co is a big partner of ours too. So we're at tech.co. Saves you a lot of time typing in our domain when you go to it every single day. For those of you that do that. And if you're looking for a domain, it's really easy to find. It's easier to find .co domains, so you can find that perfect name. And it obviously saves everyone a lot more time by not having to put an extra M in there. And then also, like as I mentioned, we got our social feed with Tweetwall. And I feel like you guys are really excited. I don't know why. I just feel that. Are you guys feeling that? Especially in the front row. I got a couple of front rowers here. I appreciate that. So we've got some great speakers tonight, so I'm excited. And we've got Joel Trammell and Scott Hess. And I want to have Joel come up here first. He's the author of The CEO Tightrope. As I mentioned, there's going to be a book signing later this evening in the back. He writes for the American CEO blog. He's a columnist for Forbes and Entrepreneur.com. He's been a leader as a CEO and with results. He's sold a couple different companies to Fortune 500 companies with 9-figure acquisitions. He's also the CEO of Khorus, as I mentioned earlier. And he's going to talk to us a little bit more about being a better and more effective CEO. So let's hear it for Joel. Come on up here.
Thank you. So someone should invent a word for the pause that happens right when a speaker walks to the stage and everyone wonders in their mind, is this going to be interesting or not? So let's start off. Here's tonight's topic. If you'll click on tonight's topic, today's management. Now, before everyone runs for another drink, if you'll click one more time, it's really about why pointy-haired boss is so damn funny. That's really the topic we're going to discuss tonight. So we'll start with the first clip, which is a Dilbert cartoon, and you may not be able to read it from your seats. And of course, you don't really have to read it because all Dilbert cartoons are basically the same, right? Pointy-haired boss proposes something that, while preposterous, we find incredibly humorous at the same time. Well, this is very difficult. Scott Adams had to perfect this. And of course, do you know how Scott Adams perfected his craft? He actually worked in corporate America. And he just took what happened to him in corporate America and created a cartoon around it. And so pointy-haired boss is so funny because all of us have seen these things happen. Now, as a 25-year entrepreneur and CEO who's been trying to figure out how to influence people in my companies, it's very important that I understand why pointy-haired boss is funny and maybe give you some mental models that you can apply as to why management in a lot of companies don't work and the things you can do to make it work better. So if we'll go to the next slide here, I once wrote a letter to a Fortune 500 CEO who I happened to be employed by for a short period of time. And I said, the basic problem you have is you don't understand what business you're in. You think you're in a business with a bunch of ditch diggers, and I'll explain that metaphor in a moment. And I said, you're really in a business with a bunch of portrait painters. So what does that mean? What do I mean by that analogy of ditch diggers versus portrait painters? Well, if you go to the next slide, you'll see, let's think about if we were going to manage a group of people digging ditches. Now, there are certainly going to be in a group, let's say we had 50 people digging ditches, there are going to be some of those ditch diggers that are better than other ditch diggers, right? Okay, great. Are there some that are twice as good as another ditch digger? Maybe. That would probably be on the outside. Matter of fact, I looked at the Olympic record for the 100-meter dash. Anybody know who holds the Olympic record for the 100-meter dash? Usain Bolt, you're correct. Okay, and then I went out and ran a 100-meter dash the other day, and at closing in on 50, I could time about 14.8 seconds. He does it in about 10 seconds or a little less than 10 seconds. So he's about 1.5 times as fast as I am. So I figure a ditch digger would have a hard time being more than 2 times faster. Other thing interesting about ditch digging, there's no unique skill to it. one might be able to dig faster, but there's no difference in the quality of ditch digging significantly. Ditch diggers also don't need to understand exactly why they're digging the ditch. You can very easily describe a ditch to some ditch digger, and you can say we want to dig 100 feet long, and we want to dig 6 feet wide, and we want to dig 5 feet deep, and they can go do it. And it turns out in that type of work, if you motivate them with money, they will be more successful. Okay, so if you go to a ditch digger and say, the more you can dig, the more I will pay you, they will dig faster. Okay? And so that is the ditch digging model. So if you're managing ditch diggers, all these things are very important to think about, and how you motivate them is very obvious. Now, most of us don't work as ditch diggers. Any ditch diggers in here? I hope I have not upset the local ditch digging union since I'm in Chicago, but no ditch diggers. Okay. So go to the next slide, and let's talk about what I bet 99% of the people here in the room are. And that is portrait painters, or some job that requires some amount of knowledge, skill, and creativity to complete the task. Okay? And so the interesting thing about painting a portrait is you would never have multiple artists paint a portrait. Okay? There's no way to get any scale. If I was in a portrait painting business, I would just hire multiple artists, but I would have each one work on one at a time. There's no good way to divide up. You paint the top half, I paint the bottom half. Doesn't quite work in portrait painting, right? And then if you're in a portrait painting business, how much is a Michelangelo worth to you? Is he worth twice as much as the average portrait painter? Or is he worth almost an infinite amount more than any other portrait painter? So instead of having the 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1 kind of ratio that you might have in a ditch digging job, you have a 10 to 1 or a 50 to 1 or an almost infinite to 1 ratio of work, right? And there it turns out in creative type processes, and there are an incredible number of studies that over and over confirm this, that money does not actually cause people to do better. If I go to a Michelangelo type artist and I say, I will give you twice as much if you paint this picture in half the time, they will actually not perform better. They will perform worse. Okay? And so there's all kinds of implications around this. And if you go to the next slide, just this pay for performance concept, there are a lot of companies. I was sitting in a board meeting this past week where somebody just asked the question, because performance in the organization was not the way they thought it should be, well, do you have the proper incentives lined up in the pay structure to compensate people? And I almost wanted to scream, because all of these people in this organization were creative Michelangelo types, and paying them more was not necessarily any way to engage them more. If what this study showed was if you paid people more and got more performance, you would expect some sort of linear relationship. And when you go to the next slide, you'll see what actually happened is performance was all over the place relative to pay. Okay? Now, I'm not concluding from this that you as a knowledge worker should not be paid. I'm just telling you that if you want to incent people to do better work, paying them more, offering them a bonus, doesn't necessarily buy you anything if they're any type of creative person. Okay? So you put all these things together, and if you go, I'm going to have the virtual clicker here. It gets very interesting. Why is this true? Why is it true that you pay us more and we can't do more creative work? Well, it turns out it's because our brains aren't wired that way. When we were growing up, and I mean as a species growing up on the plains of sub-Saharan Africa, it was most important to be able to recognize when we needed to run and when we needed to hide very quickly. And therefore stress, when you introduce stress, we tend to run and hide, which is not very good for creativity. So there's a gentleman who introduced what's called the SCARF model, okay, which identifies these 5 factors that cause people to exhibit this fight or flight reflex. One of them, status. So why do people get so upset when you take them from being a senior VP to being a VP? or from being a project manager to a junior project manager, because that affects their status. Why do people like private offices? Well, because nobody ever invited their family in to show them a cube, okay? Certainty. People like certainty in their lives. Why do people sit around the office and rumor about what's going on with the company? Have you heard? Are we getting sold? Is that new VP getting fired? All those things, because we seek certainty, or it causes stress. The next thing we seek is autonomy. We want to be left alone. We want to be able to do things on our own, or we are stressed. We also want to feel part of a team, related to people, part of a work group, okay? And then finally, the last thing in the SCARF model is the idea of fairness. There's a natural, inborn need for us to feel fairness, that people are treated fairly. So the biggest thing is around pay. When you find out the guy next to you doing the same job is making 10% more than you are, you get very upset and you get very stressed, and therefore you can't perform creative work. So you put all this together and you find out that the number one responsibility of management should be in a creative company to reduce stress. Okay? Sorry, we don't have a clicker here. So what leadership looks like and intelligent management looks like in the future is the ability to minimize stress in their workforce, maximize alignment, and make adjustments in real time, because it's a very dynamic work environment. And so those are the things I talk about in my book, which I'll be happy to give away. Unlike Frank, I give away books once we get to the networking period. But this is summarized in the concept: great leaders avoid surprises and are able to predict where their company is going. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes about what Khorus does in a second, and how we help companies and leaders reduce stress in their organizations. So it's all about alignment and predictability. The two things you need alignment, you need everybody in the organization understanding where we're going, so that is setting direction from the top. You need somehow that communication to go all the way down into the organization, and then you need a way to find out reality, I call it, or human insight, as I put it on the slide, from what's going on in the organization. Okay? And it turns out this has been known for 200 years. Clausewitz, in learning how to maintain and control armies in the 1800s, figured all this out, and corporate management has just not gotten on board. And so these are the kind of things that we think are very important, and why we built Khorus, the software. So what is Khorus trying to do? Well, our mission is to make our customers the best run organizations on earth. For some companies, making them better run is not hard. Our vision: powerful, cohesive organization that gets the right shit done. And they made me put shit in. My team did. I didn't want to use that word, but they made me put it in. And so how do we do that? So how does it relate to all the things I've talked about here of de-stressing people? Oop, I thought there was a picture. Maybe there isn't a picture there. Okay. So what does Khorus do? So it's important for everybody to understand what they do. When I sold one of my companies to Computer Associates, I had dinner with the CEO of Computer Associates. He had just paid $200 million for about 200 people. And we had the dinner, and, I kind of handed him the keys to the office and said, okay, now it's yours. And I asked him a question. I said, I do have one question. I said, how do the people that used to work for me that now work for you know what has changed and what they are supposed to do differently? And he kind of looked at me, and it was obvious he had no really good answer. And of course, the answer was he would tell somebody, who would tell somebody, who probably had left the company, who would tell somebody else, who might get down to my guys in Austin what it was they wanted to do. And it just amazed me that we run companies from Fortune #1 all the way down to 20-person, early stage startups, and none of those companies have a written record of what it is people are expected to accomplish. Now, they have paperwork for everything else. Matter of fact, one of my developers, 6 months after the acquisition, pasted on April Fool's Day a requisition form on the bathroom for how to requisition use of the bathroom. Some people thought they were serious. But think about it. In any of your companies, is there a written record that talks about, writes down, aligns everyone in your organization as to what to do? If anyone has one of those, okay, there's one. I want to talk to you after this. Okay, see how you're doing it. But of the 100 people or so in here, there's one. Well, the prediction I'm going to make is that 10 years from now, every organization will have a written system of record for what it is they expect people in that organization to accomplish that includes clear goals and measurements of those goals. And I think this will happen just like 15 years ago when I had a business, and the first time I ever heard of Salesforce.com, people said, oh, Salesforce, well, you'll never get sales guys to put their contacts information shared with the company. At that time, salespeople owned their own contact information on their own computer. People said salespeople never do that, never put their contact information shared with the company. And second, they said you'll never get people to store company information in a remote data center, what we now refer to as the cloud. And of course, 5 years later, you woke up and you were a caveman as a sales VP if you didn't run your organization using Salesforce or some similar tool, right? And so I believe the exact same thing's going to happen, that 5 years, 10 years, I don't know when, that if you don't have a written system of record for what's going on in your business, you're going to be perceived as a caveman. And then the second thing Khorus does for you, so that gives the alignment to the organization. But the second thing it does is it gets input from everybody in the organization by asking two very simple questions. And so those questions came about because when I was developing the system originally, I had a PhD working for me, and I said, I want to add status updates. You know, we have these directives, we have these goals, and I want to get a weekly status update. So send an email to everybody in the company and ask them for a weekly status update. That's all I said, status update. He came back about 3 or 4 days later. He said, Joel, you don't want status updates. I said, I don't want status updates? I thought I wanted status updates. But knowing this gentleman, wicked smart kid, I said, okay, Mike, what do I want? He said, well, what if I tell you I'm 50% done with a project? I said, what does that tell you? He said, that leaves it to you to try to figure out whether I'm going to get done or not. Matter of fact, I could be 80% done with a project, but have no idea how I'm going to get the last 20% done. He said, I could be 20% done, but know exactly how I'm going to get the last 80% done. He said, what you want to know is the likelihood I'm going to complete the project. I said, you're absolutely right. He said, I've heard you talk about the job of the CEO is to look out into the future and predict what's going to happen, avoid the icebergs. And it hit me when he said that. I'd spent years sitting in operations meetings talking about what was going on in a company, and every time the data that people were giving me, other than sales, who would always make a forecast, all the other data was historical in nature. People would tell me what had happened. Okay, and so what would happen in the ops meeting? We'd spend 95% of our time talking about sales forecasts. Anybody sat through that meeting before? Okay, 95% of the time talking about sales forecasts. Why? Because that's the only data that had any value. What we do with Khorus by asking everyone in the company to make a prediction is we make all the data about the future. Okay, and then the second question he said, you want to ask me? He said, you used to walk around the halls at our previous company, and you would know where the status of the project was, but he said, you'd ask me, how did I feel about the project? And sometimes I'd tell you, hey, it's a great, the product's great. Sometimes I'd tell you, Joel, we had to cut a bunch of corners, and it's held together with duct tape and baling wire, and I just hope it works when we ship it, right? And so he said, you want to ask me, how do I feel about the quality of the work done so far? And I said, you're absolutely right. He said, because, maybe I'm a sales guy, and maybe I'm going to hit the number, but I know it's all low-margin business. Or I know I've deleted my pipeline, and I'm never going to be able to sell anything next quarter. And so those two questions asked for everybody in the organization for each of their goals provides a wealth of data up to the organization, to the leader of that organization on how to run the company. And so we think that's a huge opportunity. I think it's the biggest greenfield opportunity in enterprise software. And hopefully 10 years from now, Khorus and Salesforce will stand side by side as names in your head. Be happy to take some questions.
Who's got the first question? Don't be shy. You might get a book, a free book. A free book if you ask a question. Oh, see, that did it. All right.
The free book.
Who did you ask? Did you have your hand up? Okay.
Thank you for your talk. What about people who respond positively to stress?
So, funny enough, I was having breakfast this morning in Austin with a Special Forces operative. And, of course, the key predictor of whether a person is going to make it through Special Forces training is how they respond to stress. And it turns out some people are, positively wired. But I wouldn't try to build my company around those people because they are few and far between. Most of us do not perform well under stress, and it has a whole bunch of implications. I mean, there's a great study. They studied the British governmental system, which is a very rigid system, and you reach different levels in the system. And just by merely reaching a higher level in the British system, your lifespan, on average, improved by about 2 years. So just having the decreased stress of having reached one level higher of status, and this was true for like multiple levels, added about 2 years to your life. So most of us do not handle stress very well at all. I used to have a full head of hair, for instance, and now I don't. Yes, sir.
Here's your book. Oh, one second.
Oh,
Sure.
sure.
You want to repeat the question?
Microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked for a lot of companies. I do consulting. I'm just wondering why most companies don't do this.
Yeah,
I mean, why are they running it like ditch diggers, as you said?
Yeah, exactly. So, the first reaction when I started developing Khorus was, you keep thinking when you're starting a new company, in the back of your mind, I'm going to walk in one day and somebody's going to say, Joel, you're an idiot. There's this system out here. Everybody uses it. Everybody's got it. And I kept having conversations, and you keep having conversations, and you find out, my favorite one was the chief of staff for the CEO of Western Union. So Western Union, 10,000 person company or so. Chief of staff is a Harvard MBA, so this is not some, assistant making, $40,000 a year. This is a Harvard MBA as the chief of staff. He says, I spend most of my time each week coordinating 200 Excel spreadsheets passed around from executives all over the world to try to give a picture to my CEO as to what's going on. Okay? And you're just like, really? I mean, spreadsheets? I mean, anybody got that going on? Goals and objectives and spreadsheets you're passing around in your companies? Yep, okay, yeah. I mean, spreadsheets? I mean, it's 2014, guys.
Yep. Here's another question right here.
Could you give us some before and after examples of finance or customer service or HR shifting from regurgitating the past to predicting the future?
Yeah, so lots of examples. It changes. What happens first is, so people will come up with goals first. And let's take an HR goal. And when I was at Computer Associates, HR viewed their role to decrease the dollar per square foot per employee they spent. Okay? And so I literally got in an argument. They had just written a check for $200 million. I had about 75 engineers in the company, and mainly they were interested in the product. So they had roughly paid $3 million an engineer. For those engineers, and I got in a discussion with their HR group because they wanted to put my engineers in Raleigh, North Carolina in 6x6 cubes where they couldn't even fit 2 monitors in the cube next to each other. Okay, and all these guys, we had of course given them workstations, private offices, 2 big monitors, everything they needed to be productive. Okay, and so what happens in organizations is if you don't have any of this system in place, they end up with goals like that. We wanted, our job's to decrease the dollar per square foot we spend on people, even though the job of CA was to write software, right?
I'm not talking about goals. I'm talking about putting your proverbial cojones on the line and saying, we're going to do this. That's what a prediction is, right? I mean, goals are like whatever.
Well, yes, but so the goal, so the appropriate goal for this HR group, of course, should have been maximizing employee satisfaction, right? would have been the appropriate goal, and making a prediction about what the score was going to be on the employee satisfaction index would have been the appropriate measurement. But what happens to people is they get so focused in their little area, nobody ever communicates what's going on up above or how they tie to what's going on up above. And so you end up with groups that don't make predictions. All they do is optimize locally in their local area.
All right.
There's one in the back.
Who else has questions? Back in the back here. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Do you believe in the dictum that there's a difference between an entrepreneur and a CEO? Or that there is a certain type of person that can bring a company from nothing to $10 million and a different type of person that can bring them from 10 to 100? And if that's not the case, what does it take for that person to get over that hump?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the difference between an entrepreneur and CEO? And I started my first company 25 years ago, so I'm known as a startup guy, but I've built the company up to 250 people and $60 million in revenue. So there are absolutely different stages you go through. Until you get to about 20, 25 people, you have customers, you have investors. There's not a real CEO job there. It's more a project management job of building a product and getting it to market. And that's the challenge. Can you make the jump between being a project manager and being a CEO? I think most people are quite capable of making the jump. The problem is there's not a lot of training on what the CEO job really should be. One of the reasons I wrote the book and what the book is all about is a methodology around the CEO job. If you look at the folks who've been very successful in the CEO job, there's a wide range of people. Most people would say you'd have to have a lot of experience to be very successful in the CEO job. Well, Zuckerberg didn't have a lot of experience. Gates didn't have a lot of experience. Ellison didn't have a lot of experience. I'd like to have their problems as to which house they're going to go to this weekend, right? And so it turns out that's not what predicts success. It turns out that if you're really smart and a very fast learner, like all of those were, and you focus on the right things, I think most people can make the transition. The challenge is there's not a lot of information out there about what that transition looks like, and finding the right mentors and right people who can help you along that transition is probably the biggest challenge.
All right, there's a question in the back here. He's actually got laryngitis, so I'm going to ask it for him.
Okay.
How does your system differ from ICIL or relate to ICIL? Is that ITIL?
ITIL, okay, yeah. Yeah, so the way I look, if you think about all the different areas, whether you come out of sales, there's sales methodologies. If you come out of IT, as ITIL's related to, there's IT methodologies. What we're trying to do is normalize the data to some extent across the whole organization. Okay, if I was running a sales organization, I'd use Salesforce and a certain sales process. The problem is I can't take that sales process and sales data and sales methodology and run the whole company that way. So what we've tried to do is kind of normalize the data by using objectives and this predictive questioning to kind of normalize the data across the whole organization. So you can look at everything instead of having to switch between sales data, marketing data, IT data. You can look at everything kind of in the same way. Okay.
All right. Shaking his head. I think that's good. Good answer? Okay. There's a question on the right side here. All right. You don't have laryngitis, do you? Okay. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Two-part question.
Yeah, so good question. The CEO is the guy that has to lead the effort. If the CEO is not going to use the product to drive alignment in his organization, it's a waste of time. You can't, I've never seen an organization where all the people from the bottom got engaged and carried the CEO to a place he didn't know he wanted to go. They may all get together and revolt and get him kicked out, but you can't drive alignment bottoms up. And so, you know, we talk to the CEO. We find the CEOs get very excited. We find the entry level, the line level, the lowest level employees, individual contributors also get excited because they understand, they can then see how their contribution contributes to the whole. Where we do get pushback is the executive level. The VP of sales who says, I have Salesforce, I don't need this other system. And to some extent, that may be true. He may not need it as badly as the CEO and his employees need it, but I think long-term, his ability to see what everyone else is doing and have rational conversations with other groups is very valuable. One of the things in deploying this system personally over the years, sales used to come into my office and say, marketing's a bunch of idiots, okay? After deploying the system, they come into my office and say, oh, that marketing program that they say they're running to generate these 1,000 leads are not generating the quality of leads that we need. And they're a bunch of idiots. But it changes the nature of the conversation. It allows people to talk across departments in much more intelligent ways and understand what other people are doing. So.
All right. Other questions? Okay, you're going to make me work, huh?
They're making you... We're alternating one side of the room to the other.
Yep. Okay.
So I have a two-part question as well. How do you explain or how do you handle, let's say, some of the newer methodologies, your lean methodologies, your agile methodologies that, really out of your three main points are impacting two of them, possibly in multiple directions?
Yeah, most of the lean and agile, at least around the startup space, works great up to a certain number of employees. We're focused certainly on north of 25 and really north of 100 employees where you get a much bigger operation, and some of those things don't quite fit as well, much more mature organizations.
Okay, and my second question would be, do you really believe that the portrait painters are not motivated by money? Because I would definitely like the list of your contacts.
I didn't say they weren't motivated by money. What I said is if you put a creative type person, if I gave you a test, for instance, that was solving a problem that required creativity in your brain, you would perform worse on it in general if I offered you a $1,000 prize for completing it, if that was a significant enough amount of money to you, than you would perform if you did it merely out of the joy of your heart of doing it, because your brain will interpret the money as the carrot as a stressor. And this has been shown in tests all over the place. So I'm a big believer. I never pay for performance. Performance and pay are totally independent things to me. Every employee I've ever had, I said, you have a market value. You have a certain skill set. You have a certain value in the market. In past companies, I've said, I pay you at the 75th percentile of what we argue the market value is. But that's based on an objective set of numbers. Now, we can, you still may haggle over 1,000 here, 1,000 there, but it's not, if you perform well, I'm not going to pay you more. If you perform poorly, I'm not going to pay you less. Pay and performance are independent. I'll do other things. If you perform badly, obviously I may fire you, but I'm not going to pay you less. And for most creative types, it's the fairness issue around pay that gets people all into trouble and gets everybody upset. And then putting bonuses in place and everybody going home and telling the spouse, oh, I make 150 when they really make 100 plus 50, and then they don't get the 50K bonus and everybody's hacked off even though it wasn't their fault. And so there are a whole bunch of things around that the fact that creative types don't perform better with pay on the line that are related.
Fair enough.
I think we have one more question. If anybody else has a question. Anybody else? Oh, there's one behind me. Right behind me. Here.
Double dipping here. Could you tell us about the reward of social class, or not class, but
status?
Well, having other people, like, you're doing it because you're passionate about it,
yes.
And other people, I don't know what to call that.
Yes, I mean that is, the best organizations in the world. Name your best organization that you've been a part of. The people were there doing it because they believed in the mission and they were passionate about the mission. Didn't mean they didn't get paid. I'm not saying those people didn't get paid, but they weren't doing it because of the money, and they were not motivated by the money specifically. And if you want to build a high-performance organization, you have to understand the way the human brain works and take advantage of that. instead of thinking you have a bunch of ditch diggers and you can just throw $100 in front of them and they're going to go dig harder for you.
All right. I think that does it. Any other questions? Last, if there's a quick one? No? One more? Okay, one more quick one.
So most companies, do pay raises based on performance.
Yes.
So for your companies you've been, how do you reward your employees if it's not performance-based pay?
Right. So what I do for the people who are A players, which are the people, I would ask my managers every year, who, if they left, would cause your stomach to turn? Okay, when they walk in your office, who would, if they said, I'm leaving, you go, oh, shit, I don't know where I'm going to find that guy. Okay, and so what do you do for those people? Well, you give them more equity in the company. You give them more responsibility. You give them a faster career path. You give them more training, okay? So there are a lot of ways to reward people. You actually reward them in the way they want to be rewarded. Some people like praise. Some people would like being called up in front of all their peers and telling them how great a job they did. Some people don't like that, however, so you have to know that some people aren't going to find that rewarding. And so there are a whole bunch of other ways other than pay that you can reward people. Now, some of the things, promotions and stuff, may lead to pay increases, but it's not pay for performance in the traditional sense.
All right, let's hear it for Joel.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. All right. Our second speaker is Scott Hess. He's the SVP of Human Experience at Spark. Oh, thanks. We're going to bring some chairs up here. He's also a leading expert on America's youth. He's been studying the millennial generation, and he's delivered more than 400 presentations and speeches to audiences of all sizes around the world. His client roster includes Nike, Adidas, ABC, MTV, American Eagle, Hot Topic, Coke, and Pepsi, which is interesting. Activision and Electronic Arts. His talk, Millennials, Who Are They and Why We Hate Them, has generated more than 150,000 views and counting. So let's hear it for Scott Hess. Is your mic on?
I think it's on. Oh, it's on.
It's on.
It is on.
How are we doing? You doing all right?
Yeah, when I got here, I asked for a drink. I asked for tequila on the rocks, and they obliged me without a water, so I've been over there drinking it like it's water so the Q&A could get interesting.
That is excellent. All right, so I think everyone in our audience needs to be doing the same. No, I'm just kidding. So tell us a little bit more of your background. Like, what are you up to? How did you get into the space of being really a thought leader in the youth generation and following that space?
I think it's the luckiest thing in the world. The fact that I have a job is a sort of miracle that my parents celebrate every day. I went to college back when you can go and study liberal arts because it was college and you didn't have to know what you're going to do. So I actually majored in creative writing and was really into poetry. So I essentially was a poetry major and thought that I would eventually settle into a entry-level poetry job and found out that that didn't exist. And I also discovered that I liked money and the stuff that came with money way more than I thought. I moved to Chicago and no girls really wanted to talk to me when I was unemployed and had no money.
Did you write them poems?
It didn't. Poetry was poor currency in the 80s. I mean, it was about stuff.
Right.
So, I moved to Chicago with $200 and all my stuff in moving boxes because I didn't have luggage, and I lived with my grandma. Mm-hmm. And I got a job as a proofreader at Anderson Consulting because I was discovered when I was volunteering. And through that, I just kept heading. I eventually figured out that the comms arena was where I should probably play, and I kept heading. Every ship heading in that direction I took. I moved from proofreading to editing to writing to marketing to actually to research. Okay. And that's where all of a sudden I discovered that research was a lot like school with a budget, but instead of paying for it, I was getting paid to go to school. And that's where I really got excited and became happy. And that's where I was a painter instead of a ditch digger and started getting paid multiples of my ability instead of incremental raises.
Way to tie that together. That's great. Okay,
I like Joel's talk a lot.
Yeah,
he was tough to understand through his thick Chicago accent.
No, he's from Austin. He's from Austin.
No, I know.
Okay.
That was a joke.
I know. I got it.
The tequila has steeled my senses.
I can tell. All right, so let's talk about millennials. What the heck's a millennial? Just so everyone's on the same page.
So I would assume, what's a millennial? How many millennials do we have in the audience right now?
I think, wow. They know they're millennials.
You guys are that calm? Yeah. I mean, how many of you guys are millennials?
Let's hear it.
Yeah. How many are Gen Xers? And baby boomers?
They sit in the back. The baby boomers sit in the back. Did you see that?
There are also silent generation people that can't hear us all the way up here. But the reason I play that little game is, what is a millennial? Millennial is a generation, right? And it's soft science. And people say, like, well, generational theory is not real. It's soft science. It doesn't mean anything. And then you go ask a big group, who's a millennial? And usually you get people raising their hand and smiling and having this sense of identity. So a millennial is a member of the millennial generation, born roughly between 80 and 2000. They are between 14 and 34 years in age, and they number about 80 million people in the U.S. That's a millennial.
Wow.
It's the prime target of almost every company in every category right now, because you millennials, are entering your prime earning and spending years. So you guys are in the crosshairs.
It's a pretty valuable group of people, is what you're saying.
It is.
Okay, so how are they different? How are they different than the other generations?
How are millennials different than other generations? I mean, the most obvious thing is their relationship with their parents is so different. My favorite way to prove that out is, if you're a Gen X or a baby boomer, I want you to think back to your first concert. Think about who you were with, where you were, and who you saw, and think about the role that your parents played. My first concert was in Dayton, Ohio. We drove from Hamilton, Ohio to Dayton, Ohio. I was going to go see the Cars with Nick Lowe as the opener. My friend's parents drove us.
Yeah.
It was 1978 or 9, and they dropped us off in the back of the parking lot. Their role was transportation, period.
Oh, wow.
Nowadays, most millennials' parents took them to their first concerts, went into the concert with them, bought them the T-shirt, and took pictures with their kids who were shockingly not embarrassed to be there with their parents. So a huge difference is that these guys actually have parents that felt a bit like peers, a bit like cheerleaders, a bit like contemporaries. They weren't the command and control authoritarian parents that we had. They were people that were actually in their corner from the get-go and that actually respected their privacy. That's a huge difference.
So you use that, is that a test, like, for if you're a millennial or not? Like, what concert you went to and how was that experience?
I think if you went to your first concert with your parents and they weren't deadheads, chances are
what about
you're a
Buffett?
millennial.
Jimmy Buffett, does that count
The
too?
Jimmy Buffett people, I don't even know what, that's like lower than a deadhead, yeah. Uh-oh, alienate people.
Yeah, don't alienate, okay. Okay, so how do they use, okay, so we're, this is Tech Cocktail or Tech.co, and we talk a lot about technology and how that, is enabling a lot of different businesses.
Yeah.
How do millennials use technology differently?
To me, one of the biggest, so I've gotten to work with a bunch of different tech companies. I spoke at Dell several years in a row at their global marketing conference. Worked with all the gaming companies. I've worked with everybody on their digital initiatives. I think the biggest thing is that a lot of Gen Xers and boomers, when they think about millennials, they think, you guys are the tech generation. You guys know where it's at when it comes to technology. And they neglect to remember that what you guys are is the easy interface generation. Gen Xers, we learned how to program by using cards and punching holes in the cards, or writing BASIC or COBOL or whatever, and going to these...
Basically hitting two sticks together and making a sound.
Horrific, man. Yeah. We had to know how that... It was like you had to learn how to change the oil in your car to be allowed to drive. And millennials drove from the get-go, and there was no chance of having an accident.
They didn't even have oil, I don't think.
We didn't have any. But, so tech for us was technical and hard. Millennials, it's been easy. And so I think one of the things that's amazing when you look at these guys trying to build digital campaigns for these guys is, when it comes to tech, millennials expect ease and value out of the box. Technology is not work, and it's not boring. It's awesome, and it's fun, and it's self-expression.
Interesting, interesting. All right, so if you're a business, how do you attract, a millennial as an employee? How do you lure them in to be a part of your organization?
That's hard. So I had a millennial guy. There was this guy that was my barista at Pete's, and then he became my barista at Intelligentsia at 1871. And I liked this guy, man. He was funny, he was smart, he understood customer service and people, and I really wanted to hire him at our media agency, Spark. He went through the interviews and he did great. But what he didn't tell me was, at the same time, he was interviewing up at 1871 with this company that was this little tiny early stage company, and that was going to make him an offer. And we basically made him an offer at the same time they did, and we lost him. What they did differently than us was, number one, They thought of him as a mercenary, not a soldier. They didn't tell him about how the next 10 years were going to work. They told him that what he needed to do when he got there, it was a mission, and it looked like it had an end in sight. This guy, Jack, was like, all right, I'm up for that. It's a mission. I'm a mercenary. I'm not looking to retire from your company.
So like a hired gun coming in just to do a specific thing.
They told him which skills he would get immediately and explained to him how his LinkedIn profile would look different after working there for 6 months. Literally fed him the bullet points of what he could put on his LinkedIn profile.
Which is important.
And the second thing was, or the third thing was, they basically laid out for him what the rules were. Here's how you're going to dress. Here's how we work. Here's how, you know, we had exact opposite. We had this idea that people stay at our company for 25 years. We had an ambiguous sort of corporate culture that he would figure out over time. And this guy said,
I want the structure. I want the...
Totally.
Wow, that's interesting.
The other thing is, I tend to believe that millennials now say out loud in the workplace what Gen Xers said under our breaths and in our heads when we first got to work. Anybody that's mad at millennials, ask yourself who you're really mad at. If you're a Gen Xer or a boomer and you're mad at millennials, are you really mad at yourself because when you were in their shoes, you
thought the
swallowed
same thing
all
and
this
just
stuff
didn't
and
do
didn't
anything
say
about it? Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Interesting. All right, so I guess this, along the same lines, even if you know they're hired guns or mercenaries, as you put it, how do you maintain that? Like, how do you if they're just thinking this is a short-term thing coming in, how do you maintain them at your company as employees?
Don't bullshit them.
Yeah.
Because unlike Gen X, they have access to every other job listing everywhere, always. They know what other people make. They can share stories and data with other people. It used to be that the companies had internal and external communications functions, and you talk internally about what you would tell people externally that was different. Nowadays, it's just communication, buddy, and if you try and pull the wool over their eyes, they're dead. I think you have to be honest about what the career path is, what you're going to make, the prospects at the company, and I think you have a much better chance at retaining a millennial. I also think secondarily, man, if you're not providing them near-term value, you're going to lose them. We used to stay at the same company for a long time out of fear, out of mitigating stress, out of the fact that there was imperfect information. It was scarier to leave than to stay. Sometimes now it's scarier to stay than to leave. If that's the case, they're going to fly. So you can't just plug in once a year at an annual review and expect to keep millennials engaged. It has to be an ongoing dialogue where you communicate. It's not they're lucky to work at your company.
You're lucky to have them?
Equally lucky.
Okay, that's interesting. It's a different approach. How important is culture, company culture, for maintaining them? I know that that's been a very hot topic across the board for both startups and more established companies.
I think culture is hugely important because these guys are not about work-life balance where the daytime sucks, but at nighttime we'll pay for them to have cocktails. They want work-life integration. So I want to be able to be myself and to indulge myself at work, and in exchange, I'll take your calls and answer your emails when I'm at home at night.
Gotcha.
So I think culture is very important. But I also think that culture has to come from employees as much as from management. At Spark, where I work, we used to have Bring Your Kids to Work Day. And Bring Your Kids to Work Day was basically the bosses would parade their kids around, and the vast majority of the employees who were too young to have kids yet would pretend to admire our children and be engaged. And what we realized was a much more relevant day for our young, we added 200 millennial employees in the last 2 years, was Bring Your Parents to Work Day. Instead of poo-pooing the fact that millennials had a real connection with their parents, we invited them all to bring their parents. We had 200 parents, so 100 of the employees brought a pair of parents from San Francisco to New York, came to the office and spent the day with us, learned their kids' jobs, and then had a massive, crazy, multi-generational happy hour that would terrify any good Gen Xer. And it's part of company culture. It came from actually not telling millennials they need to become more like us, but the company becoming more like them.
That reminds me of like college campuses or something. A little bit more, like if you think about like, there's always Parents Weekend or whatever.
So I used to do work with Sodexo and a couple of the other people, and the NACS, the National Association of College Bookstores, and we found out in doing research that millennials felt that Parents Weekend once a year simply wasn't enough.
Interesting.
And that millennials and their parents wanted to be together more often.
Wow.
And so I think we've carried that through. To me, most of the things millennials aspire to are great, happy, wholesome things, and fighting against them for a long time is futile.
So I'm curious. We talked about their bond with their parents. How did that happen? Like, as a generation, how is that phenomenon out there, that there's so much better connected than previous generations?
So baby boomers have always been exceptionally youth positive and not willing to give up on culture, and so they were into music and stuff. So I think as baby boomers became parents, they weren't ready to give up on fashion and music and entertainment.
Right. So just bring your kids with you as part of that experience?
They did. A guy named Neil Howe, who's the leading living generational theorist and has become a friend, and his partner Bill Strauss suggests there's a cycle, and it's sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth.
Right.
Right now, Gen X parents are characterized as a little bit more command and control, a little bit more authoritative in reaction to the tolerance of the previous generation. I don't know, but I think a lot of it is our culture has become a youth culture. So this next group, the post generation, is also close to their parents. If 40 is the new 60, and I'm sorry, if 60 is the new 40, I think that it's the first time in history that book groups, girls, moms, and grandmas are reading the same book. If I'm going to see a movie, we're all going to see the same. Teen lit is culture right now. Teen fashion is culture. 48-year-old guys wear Converse high tops on stage, and it's okay.
That's a great point. Okay, so let's talk about how do you market to millennials? I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people want to know. Like, how do you connect with the millennial audience? Because that's an important audience out there.
It's a really hard question, and it obviously depends on category and price point and all that kind of stuff.
Any tips? Do you have any tips?
I got a big picture one.
Oh, big picture one. Okay.
So used to be back in the day, we sold function. Does it work? Then in the 80s, so if shoes, covered up your feet and meant that you didn't get calluses, they were good shoes. Then we started selling function and form. Does it work and does it look cool? Is it bright blue and yellow and whatnot? Nike's waffle trainers and a whole eruption of fashion performance shoes at the same time. I would say for millennials, to function and form, we add philosophy. Does it work? Does it look good? And does it stand for something good? Is it innately good?
So mission-driven.
Yeah, it's Simon Sinek's, start with the why thing, but I like form, function, philosophy. Philosophy doesn't necessarily have to be about social good. It could just be about self-actualization. But it's got to be about more than just a transaction. It's got to be commerce lubricated by conscience.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, so maybe you talked a little bit about social good. So what's their attitude towards social good?
I think the attitude towards social good is, I don't want to protest. I don't want to be asked to do a million things. I think that digital activism, and there have been a tremendous amount of studies about what percentage of kids are interested in going and picketing versus what percentage of kids would sign an online petition and whatnot. I think they're armchair activists, but I also think that it's not a cynical thing. It's because they think it's more effective. So I think for social good, they want what works. They want companies to do things that arise naturally from their values. If you're Victoria's Secret, you probably want to look into breast cancer. If you're a shoe company putting shoes on the feet of kids that don't have shoes, I think that it ought to organically arise from who you are as a company and not be grafted on.
Interesting. Okay.
We used to do work like that. Finish Line did a big project when I was at True, which is an amazing youth research company, and they actually asked us to help them align with social good. We ended up pairing them with Special Olympics because Finish Line was about competition and getting to the finish line. And across their internal and external stakeholders, we found that was a great alignment for them, and it changed the way people felt about coming to work at the finish line.
Interesting. So it helps you both with your product as well as with your team.
90% of what you do now has to work internally and externally at the same time. We used to tell two different stories and have two different purposes, and now everybody ought to be pulling in the same direction.
You talked a little bit about transparency, and there's been a movement towards that with a lot of new companies. One that comes to mind that's pretty transparent out there with their whole mission out there, and all their employee salaries is Buffer. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They just raised a little bit more funding. It's a social media platform. I'm curious. Have you seen that as more of a trend? I believe it's run by millennials, and they have like everyone's salaries out there, their mission out there, their culture is very open, everything's open. They just raised money, and they wanted to do it publicly for the first time. So they used AngelList to raise their round of funding so that it was super transparent about where that was coming from and who was doing what. So I wanted to just get your take on that.
For the first time, a short answer. I think that transparency is the future, and if you are transparent now, you're on the right side of history. You can do it willingly or unwillingly, but transparency is where it's at.
Okay. All right. So you give a talk. You've given a talk a number of times, and you've got one out there on the internet that's gotten a lot of different views and shares and everything else, and it talks about millennials in general, but it also kind of references why we hate them. So I'm curious, why do we hate millennials?
So I was asked to do this really cool TED Talk, and I wanted to engage this big audience, and I wanted a provocative title, and I came up with Millennials, Who They Are and Why We Hate Them.
Right.
And I arrived in San Francisco and found out that 98% of the audience were millennials.
Right.
But in reality, my talks was about an experience I had. I got to work at Anderson Consulting, and I was there only for a matter of weeks or months. And my boss called me in and said my haircut was confrontational, and that I needed to understand that I needed to make trade-offs between my college persona and my work persona.
Wow.
Yeah, and I hated that fact.
Yeah.
And I felt resented by some of the middle management layers and my bosses who didn't like me because I was young and more connected to what was going on right then. And so I ended up being interviewed by Fortune. I was in that article. I was in a USA Today article all about how boomers hated what they called busters at the time.
Wow.
And lo and behold, years later, I become this generational guy, and I find out that boomers now hate millennials too, and some Gen Xers too. And what I basically discovered was that it's a cycle.
Right.
And those that are following us down the pike at work and in the culture, we resent a little bit. That is a function, in my estimation, of life stage, that the older life stage resents and is jealous of the younger life stage, and not of cohort, that there's a generational group that's somehow worse. So my talk was really about the fact that we hate them because they're better than us, because each generation is naturally better adapted to live in the culture that it grows up in than the one before it. So it had this warm, fuzzy ending, but I did a pretty crappy job at the end. I wish I could do it over.
Got a lot of views, though. Got a lot. It's been out there.
It's got like 160-some thousand views, and I do watch it like a hawk, because if it gets to 1 million views, it goes into the big TED app, but it's got to get to a frickin' million to get in there.
Everyone here go watch it.
That'll get us to like 165,100.
There's a few more people in the back, mostly. All right, so you basically are saying that every generation then hates the youngest generation. Is that right?
I would use the term hate loosely, and I would also suggest that there's a better alliance between Gen X and millennials than there was between boomers and Gen X, because I think Gen X were youth positive, technology positive in ways that we, at least in my particular office, and it's probably because Gen Xers were clinging to you millennials as, give us any sense of semblance of youth and relevance. But I actually think generational walls have come down because of the relationship between parents and their kids, because of the connectedness of technology, and I think generational warfare is probably going to get less and less.
Okay. Is there any benefit for non-millennials to kind of cultivate this same millennial mindset then?
Yeah, because here's the deal. The culture, as I said before, the fulcrum of our culture rests atop the shoulders of youth. So for right now, millennials can suggest where your business is headed from a culture perspective, from a product perspective. And the post generation, which is what I call the people after millennials, they're post all these huge changes in the culture, like post-Obama, post-9/11, post the desktop PC, and they also post their lives online, will be the next generation to pay attention to. To me, if we're all going to live into our 80s and 90s and whatnot, there was a thing in the New York Times a few weeks ago that said we're only as old as we think we are.
Yeah.
If we put everybody back in a room that has the posters from high school, shockingly, we revert back to that. I see some of my neighbors here. When we watch The Breakfast Club together, we drink 3 times as much as we would if we... When you have the trappings of youth around you, you behave like a young person. Why in the world would we resist treasuring youth and watching youth? It's insanity from a personal and a business perspective.
So there's a pretty famous study about that too, right? Where they took some folks from a home, brought them out, put them in their old environment, and they all were youthful again.
Legitimate academic studies have suggested that when we're surrounded by those things that were from our youth, we actually feel physically younger.
Interesting. So you literally can possibly go back in time.
This is this is my excuse for spending, Monday evenings at the Hideout and, other evenings at the Double Door. Yeah, I mean, what's the point of getting old? Why wouldn't we all embrace youth culture, and youth mindsets?
Right.
I think it's a happier, healthier way to live.
Totally agree. Let's open it up for questions. What do you say?
Questions?
Okay.
This gentleman right here, I think, has at least one.
Okay, and we're going to repeat them. So just, who wants to go first? Who are you talking to? Right, okay. Yeah, he's got at least one, right? Okay. What's your first question? Go
So
ahead.
we don't have audience microphone, so it's call and response.
Well, we'll repeat it. I don't want to run back and forth.
I just read a study that showed that this whole idea around millennials don't care that much for money.
All right.
Total bullshit, because now they're getting older, they're getting mortgages, they're turning out to be way more normal.
So there's research around them not caring about money, millennials not caring about money, and now they're getting older and they're getting mortgages, and he said it's kind of BS. What do you feel about that?
I've never for a second said millennials as a generation don't care about money. I agree that life stage dictates when money matters to you. But I would also add that there are a whole heck of a lot of painter mentalities among millennials, so that money is not the only thing. Millennials are renting more than ever before. They're buying fewer cars than ever before. Their physical footprint of stuff is smaller than ever before. They're portable in terms of skills and literally portable in terms of their physical assets in ways that previous generations haven't been. So money is one motivator, but they've been aggressively digging out of debt. So they're not stuck with your job anymore. So I think money as a practical exchange of value between an employer and me is real. Millennials aren't interested in volunteering unless you're a not-for-profit. But I think that money isn't everything. And I think if you had the philosophical layer, you'd be surprised at the level of commitment and loyalty you'll get from employees.
All right, another question here in the front. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So the question is, what about the coming of age versus having to pay into Social Security and other things? Okay. So how do millennials feel about
I think
that?
it's a two-part question,
Yeah.
and having had the tequila beforehand, I'm going to endeavor to pull them apart.
Yeah.
The first question is, what's the impact of the recession, especially on the second half of the millennial generation? They are debit card users over credit card users. They are not overextending themselves with car purchases. I did research in the car category. Cars.com is a sponsor. You'd be interested to know that these guys are not interested in seeing your finance guy. They're strategizing with their parents to see if they can pay cash as best they can. They're going to pick a practical car. Maybe they'll have a sunroof or some little spoiler on the back that suggests they did a little tiny frivolous thing. But in the 80s, we bet on ourselves with our first car purchase and extended ourselves with debt. These guys are less interested in doing that. So the latter half of the millennial generation is going to be much more pragmatic. Again, I'm reminded of a young woman when I was in Florida early on doing in-person qualitative research, and I asked her to describe her future to me, and she said, I'm going to be the nurse that drives a Hummer. They're not against... They're not against possessions or flash, but they need to feel like they've earned it and they deserve it. So it's not, I don't care about money, but it's that money in and of itself is not what I'm after. The second part of your question about how they feel about paying into Social Security, to me, feels the exact same as Gen X did, which is there's this unbelievable cloud of unknowing that flies over all of us, and we don't have a frickin' choice anyway. So I don't think there's a considered movement about not paying into Social Security and all that stuff. I think they're just living under the same cloud that every youth generation for the past 35, 40 years has.
Okay. All right. Let's get a little further back. Anybody in the back have a question? Can you hear us? You can? Okay. There's one in the back, way back.
Talk about Generation Y.
Why? Talk about why. Generation Y.
This guy's a plant. Talk about Generation Y. So Gen Y was actually originally the name for millennials.
Oh, they changed the name.
And then millennials became a more popular name. Some people occasionally, if you go on the Wikipedia entry under generational theory, will still refer to Gen Y as the front half of the millennial generation. I'm guessing, sir, that you might mean talk about Gen Z, which is the 14 and unders right now.
Oh, let's talk about Z. No? He's a 28-year-old.
So my answer to that is that generational theory is soft science, and worrying about exact birth years and which generation you fit into is a dangerous proposition that's not going to get you anywhere.
Right. So is it more of a mindset?
The name of a generation is basically the product of the media and people as they talk about it. I want to call the next generation the post generation, but I have no clue if anybody will like that name whatsoever. Right now, people like Gen Z because it's easy.
Right.
My quibble with that is A, it doesn't mean anything, and B, we have to call the next generation Gen AA, which has, I think, negative implications for the next generation.
Why the post? One second. Why the post generation? For posting or what?
So the post generation, it's the two things I told you. I think this generation, a lot of generations, these seismic events happen during adolescence that you can't foresee, and that shapes them. 9/11 or the Challenger disaster, or this economic recession. But I actually think that post don't ask, don't tell. Post marijuana is illegal everywhere. Post, there's no way an African-American guy with a Muslim name can be president. Post, the computer is something that sits on your desk or you can carry around that's bulky. Post computing being ubiquitous, I think that the social, cultural, technological changes that happen just before these guys hit adolescence and adulthood, they're going to be navigating an entirely. Post, everybody goes to college. Post, everybody buys a house. Post, everybody maxes out their 401k because the stock market always goes up. I think these guys are dealing with more ambiguity, more permutations of choice than any previous generation, so that's why it's post. And the second reason is these guys encapsulate moments in their lives that mean something to them on a daily, moment-by-moment basis and post them. So I love the dual resonance of post meaning after and post meaning capturing these moments. I love post-generation. I sure hope that name wins because then it can be on my tombstone. But regardless, I'm very interested in who this next generation is going to be.
So it's up against Z is what you're saying.
It's up against Z, and the dumb, easy name always wins.
It's also, I mean, it's getting kind of boring to keep going with letters, so maybe you'll win.
You run out of letters.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so the other thing I actually want to talk about is you kind of are lining up similar thoughts around like Singularity University, things like that, I think. You know Singularity, right? And this idea...
Is that Raymond Kurzweil?
Yeah, and there's a whole university around it. I guess what I'm thinking is some of the things you're talking about with post becoming, almost this generation where we
can't tell the difference between a machine and a person?
Right. And like there's just it's like a jump, I guess you could say, because you're saying like this is all post, all the things you mentioned with post are kind of going in that direction.
So I was a poetry major. I'm still a guy that loves to read, and I'm a humanist through and through.
Yeah.
And so the idea of singularity, where the machine and the human are indistinguishable. I'm a researcher now, which is a joke if anybody knew me growing up. I'm really a poet still that happens to be able to apply that to data. When I think about big data, when I think about singularity, so far in my career, thank God, the ability to make human leaps from data to insight and human leaps from insight to implication, I've never seen a program that's even come close. The painters are the ones that make the human leaps from data to insight, from insight to implication. And so if there is going to be a singularity, in my lifetime, in the workplaces I've worked in, it ain't even close. Thank God, liberal arts majors, artists, we still have a role even in the field of technology.
Okay. All right, we got some more questions in the audience here. Who wants to ask a question? Nothing. That's
and with
it.
that, the cocktail part of tech.
Well, there's one more. I knew there's always like one last like. All right.
Just right now, just like boom, untangle the strands of. The answer to that is absolutely not, and maybe like in about an hour and a half after some more tequilas, but I would have no ability to do that extemporaneously whatsoever.
Yep. All right, we need more tequila. I knew that would bring more questions. We got one more question here. Actually, we could ask a few more. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So is Gen X the first child in a relationship, like in a family kind of thing? They're knocking down the
Total
doors.
first child. Was Gen X mistreated? Absolutely, we were. How do I feel about that? Yeah, we're this small generation and all that BS.
Broke down the barriers.
I think, you know what I love is I think Gen X are just wonderful, crazy uncles to millennials. And I think a lot of the stuff that these millennials are getting to say and do in the workplace are because crazy Uncle Gen Xer just admires the crap out of them. So I think our time is arriving a little bit later in life, but I think we're also better prepared to enjoy it now than we might have been. These poor millennials are not going to appreciate it like we do. We were just brutalized by boomer bosses. Brutalized.
All right. And I think that's a good note to end on. So let's hear for Scott Hess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And also let's hear for Joel. Joel from Khorus as well. Yep, books in the back. All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. You can go back in the back now. We'll have cocktails ready to go. Book signing as well with Joel. We want to thank our sponsors, Cars.com, Khorus, Hoffman Media, Saper Law, American Airlines.co, Social Media Club Chicago, and Tweetwall. Thank you all for coming. We'll be announcing our events for next year very soon, so hopefully we'll see you soon. Let's have a great night. Take care.